Hello, my name is Shaniko, and today I'll be talking about the macroeconomy and the business cycle. So let's begin with GDP. GDP is basically the total market value of all final goods and services produced within the country over a specific period of time. It is an indicator of how healthy or unhealthy an economy is, whether it's growing, stable, or slowing down. So when GDP rises, it usually shows that production, spending, and investments are increasing, businesses are expanding, and people generally feel very confident about the economy. However, when the inverse happens, when GDP falls, it shows that economic activity is declining. Firms cut back on production, incomes fall, and spending decrease. So what we call these changes in the GDP, we call it a business cycle, which is a short-run fluctuation of economic activity. The business cycle represents essentially the natural rise and fall of economic activity over time, which moves through a few different stages. So right, I'll begin explaining the business cycle, and as you can see in the graph, it starts off at a trough, which is basically the lowest point of economic activity, just as the economy is exiting a recession. So as the economy starts to pick back up, it reaches its peak. So from this trough to this peak, this is what we call an expansion in economic activity. During an expansion, GDP increases, businesses grow, jobs are easier to find, and consumer demand is strong. When the economy reaches its final peak, the growth hits its highest point, it usually follows through with a contraction, where the peak goes down to a trough. So in that period of time, this is what we call contraction, and it's essentially an economic slowdown where GDP starts to fall, businesses reduce output, unemployment may rise. So in conclusion, GDP in the short run helps identify business cycles, expansion, and recessions, which help businesses know when is the best time to invest and hire. Over time, it is a key indicator of living standards domestically and globally. So now we'll be moving on to inflation. So what is inflation? Inflation refers to the overall increase in prices across the economy over time. This means that money will lose value, and what you could buy yesterday will now cost more today. Because GDP is measured using market prices, rising inflation can make GDP a bit higher even though production hasn't actually grown. We track inflation using something called CPI, known as the Consumer Price Index. This measures the cost of a typical basket of goods or services that households buy. So when CPI rises, it indicates a high cost of living and stronger price pressures in the economy. So what insight does CPI change bring to business cycles, or what can it tell us about business cycles? When inflation is high and prices are rising quickly, it often signals strong demand and expanding economy. However, when inflation slows or falls, it reflects a weaker demand and may signal an economic slowdown or recession. What does inflation tell us businesses? In summary, inflation not only tells us about price changes, but also the overall health and direction of the economy. Because of the uncertainty that inflation adds, it's very important to monitor CPI trends and understand how inflation fits into the business cycle. So now I'll be moving on to unemployment in economic terminology. Unemployment in economic terms occurs when people who are willing and able to work cannot find a job despite actively searching for one. The unemployment rate refers to the percentage of the labor force that is unemployed. It is usually a very key indicator of how the economy is performing. Of course, not everyone can be employed. Economists often compare the actual unemployment rate, which is denoted as U, to the natural rate of unemployment, which is U star, which is a normal level that exists even in a healthy economy due to job changes or skill mismatches. When U, which is the unemployment rate, is higher than U star, the normal unemployment rate, it means that the economy is underperforming, with fewer jobs, lower income, and weaker demand. However, when U is lower than U star, it signals that the economy is doing well, there is high demand, and possibly rising inflation pressures incoming. So now, how does unemployment link back to the business cycle? During periods of economic expansion, businesses produce more goods and services, so they hire more workers, and unemployment tends to fall. But during a recession, production slows down and demand weakens, so companies cut back, resulting in more unemployment as employees are retrenched or laid off. In conclusion, understanding key macroeconomic indicators such as GDP, inflation, and unemployment is essential. Changes in GDP show whether the economy is expanding or contracting, helping my firm anticipate shifts in shrinking demand, so we can adjust and cut back accordingly. Inflation affects costs, pricing strategies, and long-term contract planning, influencing how my company manages fuel and lubricant pricing. And unemployment reflects the strength of the labor market and overall business confidence, which shapes customer activity and hiring needs. By analyzing these indicators together, Marine Logistics can better understand where the economy is in the business cycle, whether it's in an expansion or in a contraction. And through that, we can make informed decisions on investment, budgeting, and operations to help stay competitive and resilient in a changing economic climate. And now I'll be moving on to topic 2, which is aggregate demand and aggregate supply analysis. So in this scenario, simple government spending attached and our analysis effects in both long run and short run. So what is aggregate demand? Aggregate demand is the spending side of the economy. It's when people spend on goods, services, and thus aggregate demand will increase. This is because aggregate demand is made up of consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. So when either of these things increase, so will the aggregate demand. But what is the relationship between tax rebates and aggregate demand? When tax rebates happen, this means that taxes are now cheaper for the consumer, the taxpayer individual. So because of this, disposable income will increase. Due to disposable income equals to Y income minus T taxes. As your taxes go down, your income, which remains the same, will result in more disposable income being available. With more disposable income being available, this increases more consumer consumption. Hence, when consumption increases, the aggregate demand increases too, moving to the right as seen in the graph. So then what is short-run aggregate supply? Firstly, we have to talk about aggregate supply. Aggregate supply tells us about the willingness and ability of producers to supply the GDP. It is the total supply of GDP by firms in the economy as it relates to the overall price level. As the tax rebate is mainly for taxpaying individuals and not taxpaying firms, the rebate does not directly change the firm's nominal wage contracts or immediate productivity. So in short run, firms will experience higher total revenue as P times Q price times quantity, as both prices and output rise. But as nominal wages are sticky, meaning that the contract made the last 2 years will still remain the same price because of the time-bound contract. This means that firms expand production without an immediate rise in labor costs. As price level rises and real wages fall, making labor cheaper, firms will increase hiring and production. This is a movement along the short-run aggregate supply curve and not a shift. There's a movement along because all other factors affecting the SRAS, such as input costs, technology, or nominal wages, remain constant. So what happens in the long run? Firstly, let me explain what long-run aggregate supply is. It is a level of output produced by when an economy is at a natural state of unemployment, U star. So what happens in the long run? Initially, the macroeconomic equilibrium of Singaporean economy is at point 8 on the graph, where national output is at its full employment level Y star, and the price level is P1. When tax rebates are introduced, aggregate demand increases, causing a temporary short-run expansion. Output rises to Y1, and the price level increases to P2. Unemployment temporarily falls below the natural rate. Firms can expand production and hire more workers because nominal wages are sticky, making real labor costs lower. However, as the economy adjusts from the short run to the long run, workers respond to rising prices by demanding higher wages to maintain their purchasing power and to cope with the cost of living. This increase in real wages raises production costs, causing the short run aggregate supply curve to shift from SRAS1 to SRAS2. The macroeconomic equilibrium moves from point B to point C in the long run. Output returns to full employment power, Y star. The price level rises further to P3. This is the inflationary measure balancing itself out. And unemployment returns to a natural rate U star. This adjustment shows that the short run boost in output and employment is temporary. For the organization, this means that the initial opportunity to increase production and hire more workers during the short run expansion diminishes over time as inflationary pressure takes effect. Planning must therefore consider both the short run benefits and the long run return to full employment output. Next, I'll be moving on to topic 3, which is tariffs and trade wars. So, what are tariffs? Tariffs are a type of tax imposed by a government on imported goods or services. It makes foreign products more expensive for domestic consumers, and this is a way of encouraging people to buy locally produced goods instead. So, why do tariffs happen? Tariffs happen usually to protect domestic industries. They help local businesses compete against cheaper or more abundant foreign goods, and it also helps to generate government revenue, as tariffs create income for government from imports. So what happens to the demand and supply graph when the tariff is placed on a product? For example, in my case, it's a logistics shipping company. As logistics is definitely a global venture, my company will take a hit from tariffs being placed upon it. Initially, the US market is at equilibrium at point A, but the equilibrium quantity is at Q1, and the equilibrium is at P1 before free trade. The consumer surplus before free trade is at P1 minus P2, Q1 over 2, while the producer surplus is P1 minus P3, Q1 over 2. After free trade, the US consumers are purchasing goods at a lower price, PF instead of P1, and at a higher quantity, Q3 instead of Q1. The US consumers now enjoy a higher consumer surplus, which is at CSF over CS, and after free trade, the US producers are selling goods at a lower price, PF instead of P1, and at a lower quantity, Q2 instead of Q1. The US producers now have a lower producer surplus. PSF is lower than PS. The US market sees imports of Q3 minus Q2. After the US tariff is being imposed by President Trump, the price under free trade increases from PT to PF. The supply curve shifts from the left from SF to ST since there are less imports, Q5 minus Q4. The US consumers lose as they are worse off. The consumer surplus is now CST lower than CSF. The US producers win as they are better off. Their producer surplus is now larger at PST over PSF. The US government wins as the US government earns a tariff revenue of PT minus PF and Q5 minus Q4. The US society loses since a deadweight loss is incurred due to the imposition of the US tariffs. The foreigner producers lose as they can sell lesser goods to the US due to the imposition of the tariff. Since my company is based in Singapore, it can now sell lesser goods to the US market, thus it also loses. So now I'll be talking about topic 4, which is about the insights that behavioral economics can provide us. So what's the definition of behavioral economics? Behavioral economics is the field of economics that is the study of how people make decisions that aren't always rational. It recognizes that humans are not bound by just logic or data. They are influenced by things such as their emotions, their habits, and their perceptions of this particular thing. So behavioral economics helps in influencing customer decisions. It helps companies understand why customers behave the way that they do. And by tapping into these behaviors, firms can design things like their marketing, their pricing, their services to better help boost engagement and earn higher revenues. Specifically for assets, maritime logistics, behavioral economics plays a key role in how they get their clients. So for example, when they're pitching to a new client, they can use the framing effect, which is when you change the way of how you deliver a question. Instead of saying to the client, oh, we only have a 10% failed delivery rate, you can say we have a very good success rate of 90%. Another way is to appeal to the customer's risk-averse nature, or rather to appeal to their risk nature. So let's say for risk-averse people, we can assure them that our services are safe and reliable. We offer guaranteed delivery times and money-back guarantees, so that they will think that, oh, this is the safest option, and they'll be more inclined to choose us. So that sums up my presentation on BUSM 2563, and thank you for your time.